call them what you like. And in play, BDSM play, so we're going to talk about accountability and responsibility, but also I want to look at those differently from an ethical stance and from like ethicals and morals, but also legal, because they are very different things. So what sort of things come up for you as we say those things? What sort of questions come up for you? Ethically, responsibly, accountability, legal, what are the sort of questions that come up for you? And what do you hope to get from today in some way, shape or form? And I apologise for my coughing and spluttering. I love the word accountability. I have it written in Hebrew on my finger. It's a really important word to me, really important word to me. I want to be accountable. I want to be called out. If I do something wrong and I want to work out, what did I do wrong there? Did I, didn't I? What does that mean? What is someone else's perception of me and how does that work? And even in my writings, I really try and hold myself accountable or hope that others hold me accountable. And I think there are plenty of people even here, Poppy, Simon, Jerry, and many others, Harris, a few other people turn and say, what the fuck are you doing, you twat? If I write something or if I say something wrong or rude or aggressive, apart from when it's called for, because I think there are some complete utter twats out there who absolutely need calling on their behaviour. And I will do that as well. So I think people will hold me accountable at times, and I like to think that I hold me accountable. But for you lot, what does it mean when it comes to power exchange, sex, all of those things? What's the difference between accountability and responsibility? What's the difference between ethics, morals, and legality? What comes up for you amongst all of those things? Poppy, what do you want to say about today?
Oh, I don't know, to be honest. I think it's interesting. I've just noticed there's less than 50 in, so I was wondering if you might allow people to be a little bit more kind of communicative today. I don't know what you think about that. I quite like when we used to do that when it was a small workshop. But I guess in terms of smaller, smaller, I said smaller. But I don't know, it's quite interesting when you said about being held account. It was what sprung to mind. When was the last time I held you account for anything? I was trying to think, and then I remembered what it was, and it was your eyelashes. I was like, you posted a blog saying you weren't doing that again, and you got your eyelashes done. What are you doing, lady? But no, it's interesting, isn't it? How we hold ourselves to account versus how we hold other people to account. And what I will say to people with whom I care for and who I have a personal or professional relationship with is very different to what I say to myself. And I think that's going to be one of the key features that comes up today. Personally, I think one of the major overlaps in terms of accountability that we don't explore enough is about shame. So I think when we really struggle with taking accountability for our behaviour, essentially that is about our relationship with criticism, about perception of responsibility, and ultimately about shame. And I think that's what I think will come up from this. I don't know whether people always make that link and that connection. And I think we see a lot of more of that now within the scene and within that community. You know, there's been lots of debates about whether it's cancel culture or whether it's a culture where in actual fact we hold people to account and what the differences are. And then I guess obviously the legal features there in terms of, well, what are we legally, you know, what are we? And again, even that differs, doesn't it? We talked about the legalities of coughing on somebody. You know, where do we sit in the US versus the UK? So I think lots of different things will come up. And for me, I like the concept of how we look at this in terms of relationships with dynamics. I always love that because essentially it is about owning our shit, owning our behaviour, and how does that work when we are in relationships where we perceive ourselves as being owned or having somebody who has a real balance in power, that imbalance of power within a relationship. So yeah, but hopefully people will talk in the chat bar and we'll get some questions and we'll get some things.
Yeah. So which season, Jerry said some are personal values, some are more social, and I really agree with that. So, and I think there's a lot of pressure nowadays from the scene. You were talking about cancel culture, and people are very called out. You shouldn't say this, you shouldn't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. But who are you to decide what someone else can do? Who are you to, who am I? What is my right to say what is okay, what isn't? And then actually, what's my moral responsibility? If I see anti-Semitism, if I see racism, if I see misogyny, misandry, if I see things that I think are morally and legally not okay, at what point do I stand up and say something? Because actually, I'm a big believer in that. We all know I'm an activist when it comes to a lot of those things. And I will stand up and say things that are uncomfortable to other people, but everyone says, oh, no, I can't. And that's not just shame, is it? That's fear as well. Sometimes we're really frightened to say anything. So Sweet Pirate said, well, I'd say it's my responsibility to be accountable for my actions. Yeah, I think that's a nice way of putting it. Simon said compact and bijou. That was about earlier, wasn't it? About the size. Hopefully that's not a personal reference. And I can't say that to him because I do know him. No, I can't really. Don't follow my lead. Don't say things like that to anybody, okay? Right, Andy says, so an initial thought for me would be, I feel like a parent, do as I say, not as I do. So an initial thought for me would be responsibility is something you need to think about before embarking on something. I like that. Accountability is something you need to reflect on if something goes sour or wrong. Just an initial thought. I'm going to cover that a little bit more, so we'll see about that. Shadow, is it shadow or shadow? Not quite sure whether the A is long or not. Self-accountability is doing what you said you were going to do. Yes, absolutely. I'm a big believer in under-promise and over-deliver. Really big believer in that. I believe that for trades. I believe that for relationships. I believe that for everything. Don't put out and promise what you cannot keep, because actually disappointment is a killer for most relationships. Holding someone, Shadow goes on to say, I say shadow because my daughter's cheer team, shadow, it's in my head all the time. Holding someone else said that they're going to do, and you know, so you hold them accountable, okay? Monica D says, I love that we hold others accountable, but we don't hold ourselves accountable. Yes, I think that is very true. I've got a writing on double standards, and we are so full of them every day. It's quite a continuous thing of, well, I wouldn't do that, but then we're doing it. And we do that a lot. That comes up, especially in the scene. 100% says so there. Line says, for me, I believe I have strong morals and accountability. Now, you see, I also find that really interesting. I think we all believe we have strong morals and accountability, but then the question becomes, are our morals and accountability, do they play and sit where we are in our society and our culture? Should they? Does that even matter? Should they be more than? Who says that our morals and accountability are strong or okay? I believe I have very strong morals and accountability, but are they right? Who says what's right? Who says what's wrong?
And it's interesting, it's how we view it as well. I had a really interesting experience this week. So I was on an interview panel, I was interviewing somebody, and long story short, but it was somebody who works in private healthcare. And one of the questions I thought was really, really simple, it was straightforward. And it was, you know, tell me a time when you've had an ethical dilemma, essentially. And that was it. You know, this candidate ended up not being appointable, but the whole interview went downhill at that question. And I'm sitting there going, this is the easiest question in the world for somebody who has that at the top of your CV. That is but ultimately from their perception, working within private healthcare was not an ethical problem, because cultural issues, and they trained in the States and all kinds of stuff that they hadn't perceived that to be. So I think that self-perception of is really, really interesting here, in terms of looking at things from that angle.
Yeah, I agree. And then Line goes on to say, as a dominant trans woman with mostly fan-presenting subs, I always make sure that I strictly work within the set boundaries. I really respect that. That includes no sex and no sexual touching, and that can be each other's both either or boundaries, can't it, as well? And it's who sets them, who says what's right and what's wrong. Some find this strange, but I'm not comfortable with mixing BDSM with sexual contact. Sorry, just my ramblings. No, please don't apologise. Not just your ramblings, valuable. Our own boundaries are what's really important. And I think one of the definitions we need to make around boundaries is, a lot of people use boundary when they maybe mean a guideline or a rule. For me, a boundary is, this is something I'm willing to walk away over. This is something where I've had enough and I'm out and I'm not doing any more. That's really important.
I wish we'd use the word preference more. We have a lot of preferences.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Good
Which
work.
is absolutely fine. It's great to have preferences.
Yeah.
But that's not
Yeah, I agree. And not saying yours aren't a boundaries line, by the way, they are a boundary. Sorry, just my ramblings again. I said, please don't apologise. That way I can always be held accountable for my actions. Absolutely. Jerry says, Simon is compact and visual. He says, look, we're doing personal references just because we know each other. Stop it. It's just like clean. Shadow says, either work. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Michelle says, well, we, my husband and I, have been offered an FM play. So that's male, female, male, I'm assuming. And the other male shows us married, but there's no mention of his wife at all on his profile. I was concerned at first, but should I say that's on him or what? Well, that's such an interesting accountability and responsibility. I think it depends how you feel about it. It's the consequence of that. For me, if I know that someone's married and I don't know that that other person knows, I'm out. I'm out because I really don't believe in having affairs. For me, it's not a judgment on anybody else. If you want to do that, I think that's fine. I once had a sexual connection relationship with somebody who blatantly lied to me about the fact they had a partner, and then I found out that partner was pregnant. I'm out. Like, I really don't like that. So for me, that's not okay. For others, absolutely okay. And I think that's the key here. What is right for you?
But I think if you're justifying that decision-making process on ambiguity and the lack of information, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because for me, ultimately, what it is, what being accountable is about acknowledging the effects of your behaviour on other people, acknowledging that, hearing that, holding space for that. And, you know, what's missing there is a piece of information, isn't it? We have no idea what impact that will have on the other person. Or maybe they're fine with it, they're absolutely great, they're okay. And I guess that is where that personal, dialogue comes in terms of how comfortable am I with that missing piece of information. So for me, it's really interesting because I identify as having ADHD. So I really, really struggle with ambiguity. So I would look to seek that piece of information out and then make a decision ordinarily, and that's why I would feel like that. But for a lot of people, they're more comfortable with that concept of it's the unknown, and you're going to hold yourself to a standard of personal responsibility or accountability based on that. But that's why we're happy with gaps quite often.
Yeah, and for me, if somebody isn't giving me some information and I can see that that information's there, I think where my mind goes and my experience takes me actually is, what other information aren't they telling me then? What does this mean about this person? What aren't they willing to share? How accountable are they? What do we do about sexual safety? What do we do about play safety? What if we come in and say, yeah, cool, you know, let's not use condoms because you're completely safe. But actually, if you're married, does that mean you are having unprotected sex with your wife? Does your wife even know that? I think there are so many other questions that cascade like dominoes from that for me that make me question, can I trust you? Are you ethical? Are you going to tell me what's right, what's wrong, what's truthful, what isn't? And are we going to have a problem? I was talking the other day because I've come off dating sites completely. I'm just out. I do it every so often because I get so fed up with what's around. But it's amazing how many red flags and issues that you can see from somebody that you're talking to. And maybe if I was madly in love with them, interesting, I'd let some of those flags slide. But actually up front, I'm like, no, I don't want to put up with this. I'd rather be alone. I'm a happy person. Life is good. I can get sex and play if I want that. I don't. So I think we have to ask ourselves a question. What am I willing to tolerate? So for me, Michelle, it would come up with what else wouldn't the person tell me as well. So Karen says, I'm really struggling with the concept of accountability within the scene at the moment. I feel unsafe. Last year, I figured out how much abusers are among us, and most people just don't care. I thought in the beginning events would be screened, but it just doesn't happen. It scares me so much, but I don't know how to address this. I feel so powerless. I think what's important there is that it's not just the scene. The scene is a microcosm of the world. The world is full of abusers. The world is full of people, but I think we can really misconstrue that when we look at the statistics. It's not as bad as we think it is sometimes. I don't think the scene is full of abusers. I think there is a percentage, and there will always be a percentage of people there who are willing to do terrible things to people. They are always around. However, statistically, if you look at all the statistics, you are far more likely to be hurt by somebody you know, by somebody you are married to, by your family, than you are by a complete stranger. I think within the scene, we talk about it a lot. I think there's a lot of toxicity in the scene where people blame and accuse. And I think there's also a lot of abuse that goes on because people don't understand the concept of consent. People don't understand the concept of what is acceptable and what isn't. And we have that anonymity online where people think they can get away with fucking blue murder as well.
It's true, and I think ultimately what we do have within the community are opportunists, and I think you will find that anywhere. I think you go to a network of single parents, for example, you will have opportunists who use that vulnerability. Only this week there's a high-profile Twitter situation occurring over somebody, unfortunately, who has personal assistants, and they have a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and there's been an abuse of power there, and it's awful. And there's a lot of people coming out who are in that situation, who are vulnerable adults who employ personal assistants, who are saying, this has happened to me. And I think, you will get that in any kind of community, any subculture, any group of human beings. And the way that we keep ourselves safe is to have these conversations, to discuss it, to talk about it. But we kind of have this perception that we have more of them here. And I think what we do have here is empire builders. I think that's the thing. We have people who ultimately have egos and who have something to protect, or they have, and that's probably quite controversial, but I've said it now, so there you go. But I think we have a high number of those people. Who I don't care, who ultimately want to, bring other people down with the view of elevating themselves, because I am the most responsible person to be managing X, and to be running this, or to be doing this, and to be doing the other. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here, accountability. We have human beings, of which many of us, if not all of us, are flawed in some way, and it's the understanding of how our personal behaviour links in with another human being who quite often it's somebody we care about, we have an attachment or an association with, and how ultimately those patterns and those cycles, are negative, and how we break down, how we look at that, and how we address that. But I don't think we have more of that. I don't know what you think, Debs, but I really don't think we do.
I don't think we do either. So, like, if you look at all of the research that covers mental health and wellness, especially on the scene, and the amount of abuse that there is, I think there are a lot of people who won't go and say anything because we are already kinky, we're already alternative, we're already different. So we're very frightened of putting ourselves out there. I think there is an element of that comes into this. But overall, the stats don't show that we're any more dangerous than anywhere else. But I think because we're pretty sexual, and a lot of sexual stuff is discussed, and a lot of play in situations and circumstances that put people in danger, then creates some different issues.
I think we are open to opportunists who come to events, thinking that they don't maybe think about it being abuse, but they go to events thinking, I can do this to this person. It's a good person.
I think there's a lot of assumption, like you say, opportunists, because I think that, oh, look, these people are really sexual, doesn't mind. And in fact, women can be really guilty of that. I find women touch me a lot more than men do. Not generically, just because women touch me. I mean at parties and other things. There's this assumption that you are a woman, which is already an assumption in and of itself, and that it's okay for me to grab your boobs or to do something. And that other people think that it's just fine because we're kinky or alternative, and in theory we're really sexual, which we're not, all of us. I think, as has been shown by somebody who wrote earlier, I don't do sex and play. Lots of people don't do sex and play. It's a division. You have to find the shit out. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to do the work up front to do the finding out. So I think you're right, Jerry. So Cinder says, Control Freak says, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with gaps. And that's about information, isn't it? So when something's missing, what else is missing? It makes us ask that question. Cinder says, my mind goes that way too, Debs, with people like that. R says, yeah, bending a truth or omission or a small fact might be nothing, but it could indicate an inability to be honest or have tough conversations. Michelle says, right, that's what we have talked about. Maybe she knows and she isn't into the lifestyle, or as my husband suggested, sometimes guys will lie about being married because they've experienced women who are attracted to married men because there's NSA. Yes, I think what that needs then for me is a conversation. Can I ask, I noticed you said you were married. And then I would shut up. I wouldn't say anything else. There's a question mark at the end. I don't think you have to say a lot. I noticed you said you were married. And that, people like to fill in gaps. That person will answer. And then it's actually, no, I'm not. It's because, or yes, I am. She doesn't know. Yes, I am. She does know. But I think what you owe me in that moment, if I'm the one asking the question, is the fucking truth. You owe me the truth so I can make a decision about what I'm willing to do and the risk I'm willing to put myself in. If you lie to me and say to me, oh no, of course I want a relationship with you just to fuck me, you've got my consent through devious means. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And I think we have to look at that. And Monica says dating sites. Oh, I'm done too. Yeah, you and me both. Simon says, wasn't that the plot of About a Boy? Yes, it was. Will pretends to be a dad to hook up with single mums because they're all easy, aren't they? Single mums. That's why they're single mums. Right. I mean, it makes me laugh. I'm writing a piece at the moment for FetLife. I haven't quite pressed send yet. I saw a status yesterday that said, oh my God. Oh God, look, I'm being sarcastic already about somebody else. I'm already being a cunt. Here we go. Right, so let's go with it because I often am. Right, so this person said, oh my God, like you're gonna love my team pussy. It's so tight. People say it's so tight that they can't control how quickly they come. And guys say, I'd love to stretch this, but you're not going to. And I really love doing my Kegels. And I was like, fucking hell, you stupid person. Let's get back onto normal. I was trying to be nice. What that does is perpetuate a fucking shit myth that vaginas are loose or get looses or I make jokes after 4 children. You could probably drive a bus up my cunt. That's not true. I can't get a fist inside it. Haven't for years because I haven't been stretched for years. It's just not true. And it's really why I'm writing about that. But that's the sort of shit that we perpetuate around everything within the scene. And we've got to be so careful and we've got to be responsible and accountable. I mean, responsibility, if you want the definition, simply means an obligation to do something. Or it means having control and care over somebody else. And it's part of your job or role. Whereas accountability means that we evaluate our performance, we check in on our behavior for which we are responsible. So there's a slight difference, but accountability is more about oversight. There's a slight difference in that.
So we have task versus evaluation a little bit. That's how that's a little bit more of a corporate explanation, isn't it? But these are the tasks. This is the evaluation of.
There are so many messages. Let's just go through them. Just this week, I've been asked if I can give someone a lift to an event by a trusted mutual friend who's had a bit of a rough time and coming out of a poly relationship that's gone south. I know of this person, but never really conversed. Even straight away, I feel a responsibility to make sure this person has an enjoyable night. Feels safe and feels better about themselves to get back on board in the scene. That's taking a lot of responsibility on Andy for no reason whatsoever. There's absolutely no hint of play, etc. at the event, but I feel trusted by this mutual friend that I've been asked to help this person. But just to get the point, I always feel as a man, I want to try and wave some sort of flag that we're not all wankers, men. I mean, yeah, I totally get that. And I think that's important. However, I'm going to pick on you, Andy, because I know you. Like, that's an awful lot of that's not just responsibility, that's taking something on. That's the drama triangle for me, where I'm responsible to take over. That's rescuing almost, which is fine. And I'm going to come on to that one in a bit because it's really important. Zoe, I've noticed women touch more when talking, even just, yeah, I do. I'm terrible, aren't I? I'm the real toucher, Zoe. I touch you all the time. So I'm really sorry if I make you uncomfortable. Yeah. We do know each other. I think it might be slightly different, but I really have to rein my hands in. That Italian blood that I have just goes, it's terrible. So I have to sit on my hands sometimes.
But it's interesting. I was in a communication, watching something about communication this week, and they were basically saying about the importance of touch, certainly with perhaps people who were neurodiverse, in terms of getting the attention and that kind of, to really focus. And there was no reference at all in the whole thing about consent. I found it really fascinating, just this expectation that it's a really helpful way to communicate with people by touching them.
Okay, let me ask you really controversially then, do we go too far with the concept of consent? I mean, maybe, do we go too far? Are we doing too much? What happens? Right, let me read these. Jerry, just recently there was information released that a lot of adolescents think that what they want from sex is to be choked based on stuff on the internet. Yeah, there's a couple of men, especially one in Romania at the moment, that's terribly guilty for that. And there's dark freak talk instead of TikTok as well. So, as what you say, does this then breed a new wave of people coming to the scene thinking we can just wade in? It absolutely does. And that is a problem. Michelle, I'm glad that helped because you said thank you. I think the bigger issue is when people assume these spaces are safe. Yes. And there we are talking about accountability and responsibility. And I'm really going to come back to that one soon because it's so fucking important. Who is responsible for your safety at the end of the day, through your life, forever, starting from now and yesterday until you finish your life race? The answer is you. If you get drunk, I'm not saying it's your fault that anything happens to you. I'm not a fucking cunt. However, if you're in a situation where you're going into somewhere where you don't know, in a play party and other things, we have to be aware of our actions, and that doesn't make anyone responsible. I have the right to lie in the middle of the high street with my legs open, with a great big board that says, fuck this cunt. I have the right to do that. I also have the right for somebody not to take me up on it. You know, I don't have the right to do that. But again, so morally, maybe I do. Morally, maybe I don't. People will be shocked by that, and it is completely illegal. There is that. That's what I mean. It's so difficult, isn't it? I have the right to walk around and do a lot of things without being molested, hurt, had a go at, hated for who I am, what I am, as we all do. And yet everything, isms, all of them, it all is everywhere all the time. And we just have to be really aware of it. And I think people think that they're safe at some of these things, and they're not. Monica says she read that one. Cindy said it's probably written by another person who owns that spam account, but it gets on KMP all the damn time. All the time. Control Freak, nice and white charger. That thing, Debs, I like you. I don't mind you doing it. I meant people I don't like and aren't close with. You and a select few here are good. Thanks. Explorer says I tend to do it too. Tom says I'm married. I told her I was bi and into sex when we dated. She now has lost all interest in any sex. I still need sex. It's a sort of don't ask, don't tell situation. I get tested and take prep. I'm kinky and she's not. It works for now. I don't want an outside relationship, just sex. If it's with a man, I think it's not an issue, but I don't know with a woman. Yeah, that's an interesting line, isn't it? It's an interesting line for some couples some of the time. I'm okay. The amount, you know, the one penis policy for a lot of couples who are heterosexual. You can sleep with someone as long as they don't have a penis. What if they're non-binary? Well, what if they happen to have a penis and they're non-binary? What if they happen to have a penis and they're a woman? Does that count? No, there's a penis. Right, okay, got that completely wrong. It's really interesting where we go with this stuff. And I look, if you haven't don't ask, don't tell, and that's kind of okay with both of you, I prefer the whole talking and working it through. We all vary as to where we go with that. Bristol Top says the assumption tends to be that events are organised, ergo safe, and the organisers are the safest of the safe. I would argue that often organisers are not safe, not all the time. I would argue the big names are not safe. I would argue that half the people that get very big on somewhere like FetLife and have these enormous poly families actually turn out to have a very different reputation after a while. One at the moment is playing in my head, which, you know, I've had 3 people come to me with stories of very serious sexual assault and abuse. And they're in America, and yeah, I'm not going to name them because of libel, but if you want to DM me, please do. Line said in Norway there are now talks about a new consent law that basically demands written consent from both parties. Wow. Before engaging in sex. The law is already found hard to enforce in Sweden. What are your thoughts? Okay, how do we prove, so lots of people do this. I want to take a video of you consenting. I want written. It doesn't mean anything in law in the UK, actually, nor in America, although they do have prenups in America. We don't in the UK. They're not legally enforceable. A contract around this is not legally enforceable. A lot of BDSM power exchange relationships have contracts. They're not enforceable. We can't prove coercion or no coercion. We can't prove that somebody was actually consenting, that they were compos mentis at the time of writing that consent. And then we've got definitions around the writing. How long do you want that to be? I mean, in some of the stuff I do, that would be like a 5,000 word essay. I'd be like having to do a lot of homework before you get your sex in. I don't know how that would work. And I think it's really difficult that people would really struggle with that. We have
when we see difficulties, don't we? It's to do with manipulation or perceived manipulation, that retroactive withdrawal of consent. And, you know, any kind of writing, be it text exchange or a contract in front of a solicitor, is not going to resolve somebody's perception of how consensual something is further down the line.
And the accountability is, what situation am I in here? What does this mean? What am I saying is okay? What am I? It's about clarity, short and sharp clarity. We tend to put too many words in things and in conversations. There have definitely been hundreds of consent apps that have been around. I've got a huge writing on consent, and the apps are mentioned in it, and actually they're proven not to work and not to be effective. So I'd be really curious as to where that law goes and what it means. Could it be helpful? Yes. Does it mean anything? Look, the police are pretty good. I know everyone hates on the police for different things. They vary. I've had plenty of clients who've been put in retroactive withdrawal of consent circumstances, whereby maybe something went too far and it was shame-based. Maybe someone felt something very strongly afterwards and had regrets. And that moral shame is a really important aspect here, and then gone to the police. Whereas actually, if you had written proof that, hey, I really want this done and this is going to be fun and it looks like a casual conversation, the police are very rarely going to prosecute or do anything. That said, the problem, especially in the UK, is the CPS can take anything out of your hands. And that's where we had the Spanner case. It had already gone too far. A bunch of awesome gay men had some very extreme, interesting play. And the video had gone round and the police thought they were dealing with a snuff video. And, you know, they've taken laws from the 1800s and made them relevant to today. And that's where we fall down, really. The contract of marriage protects people sometimes who are less likely, sorry, such a dry throat, you are less likely to be arrested or have any problems if you are married. Because, you know, domestic violence and rape is fine if you're married, isn't it? Like, it's so interesting that the law doesn't always uphold the morals and the morals don't always uphold law. And that's part of the problem that we have as well. Trevor says, hello. Hello, Trevor. Nice to see you. Cinder says to Bristol Top, I've noticed that as well at events local to me. The munches are often held in pubs, so sometimes people get drunk, but that's not the responsibility of the event organisers. See a lot of issues with people who get drunk, who then do something, who maybe regret, because all of our protective systems, like Men in Black, you know, when you've got the whole alien protection of the earth just crashing down because people make interesting decisions. I think the alcohol accountability in play is very interesting. I won't drink and play or play with anyone who appears to be drunk. Completely agree with you, Sabine. Neither will I. I will not be out of my head. However, one of my strongest fantasies years ago was, please drug me, do something terrible to me and show me the video afterwards. But I don't want the repercussions of the drug. I don't know what's going to happen. And I've got don't really want to do it. It's just quite a hot fantasy in my head. If I feel like a quick wank, that's the truth. It's not something I'm comfortable with. I've had experience though where the stance hasn't went down yet, and I think that's okay. Again, that's a boundary. It's really important we hold on to it. Pam, thank you, Deb, for mentioning that organisers are not always safe. They can take advantage of being leaders in the community. Oh yeah, and they do. I mean, Poppy and I had a conversation quite a few months ago about somebody who's still around, certainly on the UK scene, who we both see as a predator and as a real problem. And there he is, still telling us how wonderful he is and how great he is. And he's been around for all this time, since the dawn of time.
Is it really bad that I'm sat here going, which one? I mean,
that's bad and sad, isn't it? But
it's true. Was that a conversation?
Choose, not millions, but I am thinking, which one?
Was that a conversation in the car, though?
That reference was so people know the reference is on one of the live workshops that we did recently. Poppy, Simon and I were in a car with someone else as well, and everything that was brought up in this workshop we'd already discussed in the car. It was a very strange situation. I said, oh my god, we spoke about that in the car. So every answer was in the car. It wasn't in the car. And if I said the word curtain, would that mean anything to you, Poppy? Maybe you'd get it. I don't know. Maybe not. Right, so Zoe says, my concern at Lyme would be if it's agreed at a time and then they change their mind soon after. Exactly, because consent is as only current as the person is saying yes, with energy, with enthusiasm and awareness. As soon as somebody says, no, that's not something I want to do, how do we then stop what's just happened? Where is the accountability? And people like to change their minds.
Yeah, well, I like the change of minds, but also I think that links into what we're saying about accountability and ultimately, you know, the presence of new information. So consent is only, you know, I had a really heated debate, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying, with Zoe recently, because we were saying, was somebody's consent violated? And in actual fact, what happened was they were misled, they were lied to, they were told that it was a far more closed sexual relationship than it actually was. And I was like, you know, that makes him an absolute dickhead. However, there was still the onus of choice there, but ultimately we have the right to change our mind based on whatever new information we're presented with, and that might be an accountability decision. It might be that we decide, do you know what, I am going to have sex with X because they have a, you know, nothing asked, no questions, no answers sort of situation, and then you find out, oh, in actual fact, perhaps they're not okay with that, and that's why that process changes. So, you know, consent is such a fluid kind of concept anyway. I think it's like, I always view it as capacity. It is actually just a one-time single-use item, from my perspective.
Yeah.
You know, you consent to it now, because you consent to it tomorrow.
I agree. You know I do. And so Misbehave says, alcohol, I think it's also quite cultural. I would agree with you. I'm looking at buying a place in Italy. I have an Italian family. Yeah, I know. Here in Italy, it's pretty much a given that there is drinking at most events. And you know what? I would say it's half and half in the UK. And I would say, depending on where you are in America, it's less so and more so. It just depends on what state you're in, actually, as well. So from what I've experienced. Andy says, I would add that where I've been at an event, as discussed before, where the organizer sexually assaulted someone I was playing with without consent. So no, just because it's an event doesn't automatically mean it's safe. Listen, I remember doing a consent workshop at an event and everybody had to attend it. And within 20 minutes, one person who'd attended had broken someone's consent. Really? Seriously? You've just had a conversation. Now, not everybody learns through conversation. However, I try and mix my media and the way I speak to people, especially when I'm talking like, oh, how clear do I have to be? Cosmopolite says, and I think some of those people with a full sense of safety get anger and harm because I would agree with you. I think we feel more aggrieved at times. Like someone else should be held completely responsible, like the owner of that space. I agree with you, Deb. I think it's wrong to put all of that on other people. Zoe, that's my concern too. Exactly. There's that old saying, don't drink and kink. Yeah, Jerry, let it lie, you're being told. Cinders, I'm going to try and catch up through these messages. Sorry, yes, predators are often their number one fan and have worked hard to protect their position. And as again, it's often someone you know, it's often someone that you hold in high regard. Jimmy Savile, whether you know, he was such a hero to a lot of children on television in the UK. He was seen as this incredible man. What, did he get an MBE or an OBE, or he was a sir? Did he get a knighthood? I can't remember in the end. You know, like
Sir Jimmy Savile.
Sir Jimmy Savile, and he was an active paedophile. And he was seen as this wonderful saint, although the BBC and other companies and different people knew. It's often the thing about a lot of predators, what they will do is they'll make sure that their victims are a certain person in a certain way, but they'll keep everybody else sweet. That's clever. That's what they do. So Bear reacted. There's that old saying. That's a good one. Trevor says, I had it happen a couple of times where consent was definitely not something they respected. I agree. I don't know, actually, a lot of people who haven't had their consent violated on a very mild level or a medium or a severe level. I think it's quite normal. I remember having a conversation with my eldest daughter. We were talking about sexual assault. And she said to me, I haven't been sexually assaulted. And I said, yes, yeah. What are you talking about? And I said, well, you told me there was that time in the club when you were in the smoking area and that guy licked your cleavage. Oh, yeah. And I said, and there was another time in the club when you told me that you were wearing like a bubble skirt and you had a thong on underneath and that guy gripped your ass underneath the skirt. Oh, God, yeah, true, she says. And I said, and the other time when you were wearing a longer skirt and the guy put his hand up your skirt and put his finger inside your thong and tried to go through and down. And she was actually, it's so standard for a lot of people that we don't even see it as assault anymore. We don't see those things. So accountable people really have to accept how their behaviour impacts the situation.
And was very standard for people of my generation back in the day.
Yeah, the old pin stuff, yeah.
The whole thing of the rock star having sex with 13-year-old groupies was very much part of the thing then.
I think that's a really difficult one when we start to say of someone's time and the way things were. And it's, do I think that's morally right? No. Do I think they did what they were allowed to do then? Yes. Is that right? No. How much punishment do they get for that when it's completely morally acceptable? And that's when the morals and the law and the ethics will start to fall apart, especially around time.
It's more a question of, I accept that I'm a 66-year-old person. My values are not the same as the current values today. Right? Some of the things are in my head are totally unacceptable to me.
Yeah. And it's
that's accountability.
Yes, it is. And it's also trying to say, how do you talk to people? How do you have that conversation? And Andy says Jimmy was a sir. It's well known he doesn't even bounce a lot to do good stuff to feed his darker intentions. Yes, he did a lot of good stuff. I said that really badly. Sorry. Cold. And Control Freak says, but I would reverse that. Upskirting did not. No, neither did revenge porn. Wasn't around because we didn't have the capacity to photograph or to upload in the same way as easily. So there are new issues as well as there are old issues. I think when we have accountability, one of the things we've got to look at, there's if you look at some of the corporate versions of what we mean by accountability, is that if we go below the line of acceptability, that's where somebody plays the blame game. They're the victim in this. If we go back to the drama triangle that we've spoken about quite a lot before, and that is ignorance or denial. That didn't happen. Finger pointing. Well, it's not me. It's the way of the world. He did it. She did it. It's not my job. It's not my problem. So I'm not going to do anything. That doesn't matter. Confusion. I don't know. Why is it that way? Tell me what to do. Help me out here. And these are all actions that are below the line of acceptability. The wait and see. The cover your tail. I don't know if you saw it. There was a new small, just a one-off film out a couple of days ago in the UK, which was called Consent, which is based on a true story. I don't know if anyone saw it. It was on the night before last, about a private school situation where a rape occurred. And the next one I'm going to say is cover your tail. So he took a video, but he asked all his mates to delete the video so there was no evidence, things like that. And it's that whole thing. Whereas actually to be above the line, to be responsible for what we're doing, what we need to do is to be able to see it. We need to name it. We need to look at what we're doing and how we did it. We need to own it and say, my bad. We need to work out how the person wants an apology potentially, or if not, we need to solve it. And with that solution, we need to actually then do it. That's what good accountability looks like. Action. See it, own it.
And I agree with that. And I really, really agree with that. And I think ultimately, so many people view accountability as a concrete abstract. I was talk about this again, kind of a little bit more corporate, work-based conversation. But we were talking about practicing accountability, and everyone was scratching their head, well, you're either a kind of person who takes accountability or you're not. And I'm like, no, I think there really is an opportunity to be okay with making mistakes, to have a culture where we say, okay, we make mistakes, things are not perfect. We're not shame-based. We have a culture of, we prioritise honesty, and really we what we talk about all the time really when we do the workshops, we talk about that ability to be able to pause before we react, or reacting or responding, ultimately to defer before we decide. And those are all things that we can practice. We can say, okay, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And how do we adapt that culture of, rather than we either are accountable or we are not accountable. We are good people, we are bad people, we are black, we are white. And I think we do that in a way that distances ourselves from having to take accountability for taking accountability, frankly.
Yeah, and but I think that's really true, because I think we play at things. This thing is out there, so we think this is what we've got to do. I was at a cheer comp on Saturday, and my daughter ended up in floods of tears. Why? Because they got beat by another team. Should she cry when she's been beaten? No, of course you shouldn't, but you don't know the story behind it. So basically, Brian is so brilliant at cheer, she gets asked all around the world to choreograph for other teams. All of the teams she's choreographing for are winning and coming from places 20 to places 1, 2, or 3 and outscoring everybody else. I introduced her to another couple who own a cheerleading gym, and they become the best of friends. They're even opening up a new business together very soon. And Brian choreographs for them, and they're against each other. They beat Brian's team by 0.1. She got the first 3 in this whole thing. So she got the scores 1, 2, and 3. But Mint, our team, didn't win by 0.1. It was silly little things, drivers and things that don't mean anything to you. And Brian was in the changing room afterwards crying and apologising to her team. She felt really responsible. Now, she was going too far with accountability in her own way. She was saying, I'm so sorry, I feel like I've let you down. She hasn't. If they'd have sorted out their drivers, which means nothing to you, the landings on their jumps and a few other things, they'd have won. She scores. She knows if she gives another team a routine, that actually they won't win if our teams do everything they're supposed to do. And it's quite good for one of our teams to lose, because they don't.
Giving them all an opportunity to learn some resilience. Well done, you.
Yeah,
central, wasn't it?
It's a painful lesson. Have a painful lesson of learning, you motherfuckers. No, they're kidding. But actually, it's still very true. So I think we can take on too much. So accountability can go too far. So Pam said, but look at Pamela Anderson's sex tape. There was no precedent. Yeah, there wasn't. And now a leaked sex tape is a way to get famous. It's changed. It can also be about revenge, and it can be absolutely horrendous. And some people orchestrate it and do it on purpose. which one do we play with? Zoe says to Jerry that you ask and learn and you accept things have changed since your youth, and you do listen to the younger generation to learn. Love heart. I appreciate how much you do and have listened. Nice. Throat Dragon says, whenever I think about it, I come to the conclusion that I've never been in a healthy romantic or sexual relationship, except for my very first relationship when I was 13. For me, there are lots of questions around 13. Is a 13-year-old's relationship ever healthy? What are they looking for? That's quite an interesting one. And my current one, I'm 30 now. I'm pretty sure it's part of how I turned out to be as an adult and how it shaped me as a person. All of our experiences, funny enough, now going back to reading, all of our experiences shape us. From sexual assault, from horrific things, from abuse, from trauma, to winning something, to being the best you can possibly be. They all shape us. Some of us just get a bit fed up with some of the lessons and the cost of them at times. However, yes, they do shape us. I think we then have to work out from an authentic perspective, if we go back to authenticity, is this the me I really am? Is this the me I was meant to be? And what of that do I want to take? That, I think that's a very different choice. Andy said, back in the days in nightclubs when we were stupid late teenagers, it was pretty much the done thing that you just catch a feel of a girl's bum without them knowing who did it. I would add that it was done by females too, but I shudder at that now. Yes, because we have a different lens. At Zoe from Jerry, I have a lot to learn from younger generations in certain situations. People these days talk about stuff that was taboo in my day. And you know what? I think everybody has a lot to learn from everybody, regardless of age. I really hate ageism, whether it's about young or whether it's old. Be responsible. We can learn from everybody, but also be able to take the criticism if you're younger or older. A lot of people are so defensive. Don't talk to me like that. I've got years of experience. Don't talk to me like that just because I'm 18. I know what I'm doing. Again, that defensive-ness really comes into it. And Karis loved that. Zoe says, Jerry, we still have a lot to learn, and I think we learn a lot. We're a lot more open than older generations. I would argue that some are, again, I would argue that some are and some aren't. I would argue that a lot of people think they're right. There's a lot of entitlement to feelings and actions and reactions. And that's, I think we have to find that balance. I think that's quite hard to do. Throat Dragon, at least not until 2 years ago, is where I started to actually get into what I consider to be healthy relationships. I would argue that you probably did that because you developed a healthy relationship with yourself. That's the first relationship we need to be accountable and responsible for. Extended my boundaries and have been more strict about my dating pool. Yeah, there you go. That doesn't prove my point, but it sits alongside it, and it's opened a whole new door for me. And that's how I ended up finding a partner who was actually able to communicate well. I actually loved and cared for. And that's really important, isn't it? We know, I love Jimmy on Relationships on Instagram. I don't know if any of you follow him, but he's basically a man who was married and he fucked it up, and he fucked it up badly. That's what he'll tell you. And all the stuff he's learned from fucking up badly, he now shares. And he's just a gem of a person to watch the videos he does. He's great. Another fucking opportunity for growth. Yeah, love those. Cindy says, Karis, I'm getting that on a new coffee mug to start my days. Yeah, love it. So when we talk about accountability, I want to share with you the 3 C's of accountability. I don't know if you've heard them or if it's whether something you know. The first one is clarity. We need to absolutely understand what is it that's required of us? What is it that we want to give? That goes back to consent. Betty Martin's The Wheel of Consent. What am I willing to accept to do? And what is the other person willing to do? And what am I willing to receive? It's all about acceptance and receiving and giving and what we feel about that. We often talk about what we need and what we want. And what I find in couples therapy, we have to be really careful because we think we're really clear. And I totally think you mean what I said. But what happens is I speak and you hear what you think I said. And I speak and I think you hear what I said. The disparity is great. I thought I understood. I thought I was understandable. And a lot of the time in couples or thruples or groups or families, we spend time just defining a word. Well, loyalty. You know, I know what it means. I'm not fucking stupid. I can read the dictionary definition. I've got a fucking clue what it means to you. And does this other person? Well, yes, they do. Well, let's check that out, shall we? And I can tell you, 99.9% of the time reoccurring, it's not an exact definition that's the same. So we need clarity. What is it? When do we know that something is clear? When do we know it's complete? What's needed? How do we do that? The next one is about commitment. There's a real difference between commitment and compliance. especially when it comes to submissiveness and dominance, and when it comes to poly. Am I just being a good girl, or am I doing this because I want to do it and I'm committing to it? Do I own my own decisions? What am I doing here? How does that work for me? And that's hard because there are conversations we need to have. Have I done that right? Have I done that right? Without saying, do I want to do this? Where am I with this? That's difficult, isn't it? So, and with communication, we have to look at clarity, comprehension. Do I understand what you've said? Do you understand what I've said? The amount of times I've said to my kids when they were growing up, as a tactic, as a way of helping them, is to say things along the lines of, could you do your bedroom by 4 o'clock? What do I mean by do your bedroom? Sorry, could you tidy your bedroom by 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock today? I might stop myself and say, can I just check? Because I'm not always clear. Maybe we can play a game there. Sorry, not always clear. I'm aware of that. Can I just check with you that you heard what I said? Yes, you want me to sort my fucking clothes out by 7. No, I don't think that's what I said. Yeah, teenagers. So what did you say? I would like you to tidy your bedroom by 4 o'clock. But what does the word tidy even mean? To my standard, to their standard? Talking of Brian, I remember once when she was 15, I kept saying to her, Brian, your bedroom's a fucking state. Let me tell you now, we are going to reach a point in the not too distant future where I will tip every single thing you own out into the middle of your bed. No, you won't. Oh, yes, I did. It was, I stayed and I helped her. We sorted it all out. We had good, mind you, if I look at her house now, she's still really untidy. So but she loves a good tidy up every so often. She clips her own shit out. Maybe I taught her completely wrong. Fuck, So it's really difficult, isn't it? And the third C, so it's clarity, commitment, and courage. So we need to have the courage to have really difficult conversations. I talk about another C, which is a clusterfuck scene, where things go horribly wrong, where we think consent has been violated or broken. There is a difference between consent being violated and broken and being intentionally violated and broken. Things go wrong in scenes. Awful things happen. Let's be graphic. A few people here have probably been banging away into somebody who's got 2 holes, and all of a sudden, because of all that lube, it slipped in the other hole. And now, that's really painful. No one consented to it. Maybe that cock kind of broke in half or bled everywhere because the banjo snapped, or there's a ton of shit all over it, or dreadful things happen. All of a sudden, you're sharting. All sorts of things can go wrong. Nobody meant for that to actually happen. There was no conversation about consent. Something went wrong. Do we then say that person attacked me, or do we say, fuck, that was a clusterfuck? Where is our courage to have conversations to say, this is what I need to look at. How can we sort this out?
I think that courage goes both ways, because you mentioned earlier on, you said that golden word, from my perspective, about criticism. And I think whether we talk about criticism, whether we talk about feedback, I was really open and honest early on with Deb, and accountability and all good things. I think I had 7 minutes to prepare this workshop. So I was like, okay, what am I going to look at in these 7 minutes? And the one thing that I did look at was, around relationships. I had a page open in a book that I was working from, and it was about relationship work, and ultimately how we build accountability and how we develop accountability skills within a relationship. And it was talking about things like involving your partner, assessing your own regular behaviours, consider how your actions affect your partner, things like that. And it all boiled down to a lot of the things that you talk about all the time, the Haynes user manual, ultimately the radar. You look at how many of those tools apply to the situation. But I think the courage is really, really important, because it is about ultimately having the self-esteem, the worth foundations to be able to receive feedback, whether that be the word criticism, whether that be we're going to have a radar meeting, we'll talk about what we're doing good, we'll talk about what's not going so good at the moment. And so that courage really is, we talk about accountability, it's been a cycle. And I think there is a huge amount of feedback needed for that courage for it to be effective.
I agree, and I think we have to have some conversations that we think aren't sexy, but actually really are, because they're about our safety, and it's really good. And I think that's really important. And we haven't got the courage to do that sometimes.
I think consistency should be there. Can we add another C? Can we just add all the C's? Or our clusterfuck, our consistency. Fine. Well, yeah, consistency needs to be there too.
But I think consistency,
particularly when we talk about fun, I think monogamy. I've had so many sessions recently where people say, but they're doing this and here, and they're doing this here, and to me that feels like. I'm like, well, have you explained how this inconsistency of behaviour makes you feel? You know, I had 3 sessions today, and I felt like I was in the same session. Do you ever get that when you're working?
Oh God, yes, all the time. I feel like sometimes I'm having the same conversation. I think, is that me? What's my influence here? Is it the weather? Is it the moon? Is there some kind of weird energy? Is it the tides? You can ask some really crazy questions like, what is going on in the world?
In our line of work, it's because of all been at the same event. That's a possibility.
Yeah, that is a possibility. Or we're reading the same thing or something. Throat Dragon says, to your comment about being 13 and dating, she's also a woman. She was 15 at the time, and we were in the same school and had the same group of friends. We did not do anything sexual. I was way too young. I liked that. Not even remotely ready for anything like that. It was just love. Aww. And we were together for 2 years and a half. We broke up for a simple reason and still remain in contact ever since. I think that's beautiful. And I think the thing is, when we are young, we have an interesting perception of love, of what it is. It's a fairy tale often. It's bringing someone something into school. It's really sweet. But actually, love also needs to be practical. It needs to be long-term. It needs to help us through situations. And love is this crazy chemical response that we have. And actually, that doesn't give us longevity. It doesn't give us all the other forms when we look at all the Greek forms of love that are around. It doesn't give us longevity. It doesn't give us the capacity to communicate, because actually growing up is really shitty. Being responsible. I wrote something ages ago about a fairy tale life, and it's just come up again a little bit on Fet Life. And I think I like the fairy tale sometimes. You know, I want to rush for a train, and then the person I love just comes running after me and asks me to marry them within 24 hours because we don't really know each other, but we are in love, and it'll be fine forever. And our sex life, I mean, it's just absolute bollocks, isn't it? But we have to be really careful about those ideas. Joey says, or you speak, but I don't really listen because I'm already planning my reply, as most of us do. To be a therapist, you have to go on a listening skills course, first of all. That's one of the first things you have to do. Even if you've got a degree, even if you've got your master's, you still need to do another postgraduate after your master's in order to become qualified. And part of that is listening skills. It's really hard to listen. It's really hard to hear. It's really hard to filter out all your interpretations and what they mean. It's actually more complex than we think. Tom says communication is key. I like to repeat back and discuss answers and what we are agreeing to. I agree. I would also argue that without comprehension, communication is nothing. For me, those 2 C's are absolutely interlinked. So communication and comprehension, they really, really matter. Coca says, and self-awareness. That's quite difficult, isn't it? Are we truly aware? Or do we keep that same filter going? And I think that's really important, because that's really important around accountability. Am I saying this because, or am I saying this because? Which one of those? And I'm a big believer in owning decisions. If I own a decision to do that, then that's what I'm going to do. Or not, if I own the decision to change my mind. And I'm not going to have a go at anybody else. This is my choice to do this. Do I want to try this, or am I going to go with this? And that's a really important aspect of accountability. It's about your character. It's about
empathy as well, and the ability to be empathic is really interesting, because we talk about some of these things and they are behaviours and skills that come easier to some people than others. You know, the ability to be able to receive criticism, the hypersensitivity to that. You know, we talk about whether we are empathic people, but quite often what we have to consider is our perception of is not necessarily going to be somebody's interpretation of. So we will interpret and intuit our communication to mean X, but in actual fact, we say we expect people to be able to communicate back to us in terms of what that two-way conversation. But if ultimately we have the ability to be able to comprehend how it might be perceived, that can go a long way to bridging the gap. And I think that's when you get to real interpersonal effectiveness skills rather than just reasonable communicators. You know, can we fill in some of the perceptions of what this might mean to another person? And that just comes down to empathy.
And with self-awareness, like you said, interpersonal skills, we start with intra. Like, how do we start within ourselves? What's our communication and what does it mean? I think your personal responsibility is really important when it comes to you being into any form of power exchange or any form of play that you are about to do. It's a really important. It has to keep you safe. It has to protect you from predators, including being your own worst enemy, because we do talk about those things. And I think one of the things we have to be really aware of is the frenzy that we get into when we first enter the scene. We often think, well, that's the way it is. We take things as absolute. We hear things as absolute. All good submissives do this. All good tops or dominants do this. All daddies say this. If you loved me, you would. We gaslight, and we can gaslight ourselves, and that goes on and on. But responsibility is a really wonderful thing for us to take on, because it means not only did I do that, but I did it well, and I kept myself safe. Now, there are situations where you cannot keep yourself safe. I don't care what anyone says. There are situations where there is nothing you can do, and we have a form of powerlessness, and that will always come into life. I think a submissive that takes care of themselves is more attractive to a dominant. He says, no. If they're a dominant, my definition of a dominant, I think if someone's just out for predatory or easy sex, then they're going to move on because it feels like too much hard work. That isn't for me. I prefer that demi connection. And I think that frenzy can be really, really dangerous. Let's set up safety nets. Let's make sure that we make phone calls. Let's make sure that we check in with people. Jesus Christ, even have your fucking find a friend or find your phone or whatever it is, so that we are safe, so that people know where we are. We set up safe calls. We all think we're above those things, and we're not. Exactly what's going to happen here? What does it look like? What does it mean? Tell me more about your history. Tell me, and I think like when we take Poppy's question for an interview and we put it into an interview in order to play, tell me what you've done when something's gone wrong in play. And if the person turns around and says, I've never had anything go wrong in play. Okay, never, not even in sex, even if sex and play is separate, or in a relationship, where you're either lying to me, or you are twisting the truth, or you are doing very different things, and I'm curious about that. You've never had anything go wrong?
They've never played, they're a virgin.
It does make you worry, doesn't it? It does make you think, what, never? That's quite an interesting phrase, isn't it? And then what would you do? So like, for example, if something did go wrong, what would your next action be? And then we're getting into pre-morteming, because I want someone to say, I am either qualified in first aid, or I phone an ambulance, or I phone the police, because a lot of people say, I don't know. No, but I mean, if you were cutting me, I don't want to be cut, so I'm just thinking of something extreme, and then it split open, or if I bled, or if we did something, I'm going to go to my whisk story. Sorry for those of you that don't know. Right, so many, many years ago, I had a coil in, and some of you know this story and some of you do not, and I met this person in a hotel, and it was a very long time ago, and actually, God, if I look back, I made some quite naive decisions around that time. And this person decided that, this person decided that one of the things they would like to insert into my vagina, or my cunt, as I like to call it, is a balloon whisk. Now, that might be fine. Now, a balloon whisk is very dangerous if you are overweight, because actually the folds of the skin inside the vaginal walls can be caught in a balloon whisk. But more importantly, if you have a coil in and it catches, guess what happens when they pull out the whisk? I bled like a motherfucker. Sorry, control freak, because you just covered your, like, oh my God. I mean, it is a bloodbath horror story. And I ended up having to go to the hospital, and he didn't take me. He panicked. And the blood on the sheets was awful. I phoned the hotel afterwards, and I said, I'm really sorry, I had an accident. I bled, I lied a bit. You have to think, Jesus. And now I do say to people, you don't have a whisk in your bag. That's not a whisk I'm willing to take. Get it? That's such a bad joke. I'm such a dad. And so you have to be really careful around these things, because it is interesting. What tools do I need to have in my arsenal? What sort of questions do I need to ask? Why don't we ask other people like us to say, what would you ask? What does that look like? And that is a form of accountability and responsibility. Cherry Jam says, how do you know when you have consented to something? How could I know for sure if I've given fully informed consent to something? You don't. I don't think you ever have fully informed consent. There is no way you know the consequences of what you're about to do. I've booked an appointment next week to go and have, my hips have definitely been waking me up recently. I'm spending £225 to get some fucking cortisone injected into each of the bursa on my hips. Those are wounds from BDSM play over 40 years of playing. They're not wounds because they're not open, but it sounds dramatic and so much better. They're an injury, and they're a slight injury. However, they're an injury that hurts me every so often. So I'm going to go and have some quite painful injections in my hips, and I won't be able to sleep that night at all. And then by the next night, I'll start to be able to sleep. You can never give fully informed consent because you do not know every consequence that can happen from what's about to happen. You can give informed, but not fully informed. You can take a good guess. I think if you've consented to something, you do need to know. I would separate those two. I don't know if you would, Poppy, but I would separate those two as slightly different. I need to be clear as to whether I've given consent or not. That's it. I need to know that I've given consent. That needs to be clear.
I look at it from a very risk kind of perspective, and I think that's my background. So for me, it's okay. What are the possibilities that this is going to go to fuck, and what might that look like? So I can never fully consent to, but for example, if I'm going to, let's pick an obvious one, become pregnant to somebody who that's a potential for, what are the potential risks of that? And am I prepared to take those risks, and what can I do to minimise that? And I think sometimes you have to work it in reverse, you know, in terms of, am I prepared to take that risk? And we don't know, we don't even know all the unknowns, but I quite often flip that on its head and perform that exercise. I think that can be quite helpful. So, you know, if I'm engaged in breath play, I think that's why for Debs and I, you do a beautiful writing on it. It feels like it's a risk too far nowadays, because not necessarily because it's not the likelihood of, it's the, well, what are the potential consequences of? So I think, you know, you look at what you're talking about, you look at the likelihood, and then you look at the consequence. And that's the only way that I can come at consent nowadays, really.
I agree. It's risk awareness and it's personal responsibility. So we've got RAC and PRIC rather than SSC. So RAC is that risk aware consent, and PRIC is that personally responsible and informed consent. I can only be as informed as I am, and if I say yes, I have to own my yes. If there's any coercion or misunderstanding, take more time, go slower, because there is a responsibility for ourselves. And I think as submissive, sometimes you give a lot of responsibility to the top and say, well, it's your decision, you need to do this. No, it's not. It's our decision. It's my decision because it's my body, and only I live with the consequences of that.
And I think it comes back to empowerment, and that's a word that I think we probably I haven't emphasised enough in this workshop, is ultimately when we take personal responsibility, we're in a position of empowerment. Ultimately, if we give consent and it doesn't go well, it's a clusterfuck, or, you know, an adverse incident occurs, we are traumatized by that. If we come at it from a position of empowerment and we own that, we take a responsibility for it, we are far more likely to be able to make what we'd say meaningful recovery from that. And there's not a lot of studies, there's no studies really in the context of a DS relationship or a relationship with a power exchange. There is something, I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's someone Bradford, but they did a study about happiness and well-being when we feel accountable to God. I'm sorry, it's a God reference, but that's the only one we've got. We don't have a study like that in terms of accountability to a BDSM deity-like creature who we subvert ourselves to. But I think psychologically it's probably a really transferable study. And if we are holding ourselves accountable and we are held accountable to another person, the studies showed that we were more likely to be happy and have improved well-being. So I think a lot of this then does by natural conclusion come back to empowerment. And that idea that we are empowered in our submission. I mean, I've always loved that concept and that idea.
And also who we choose. Why am I choosing this person, and what are they responsible for? You are not responsible for my mental health or my physical health. You might have something to say over what I eat or what I do if we have a power exchange relationship, but ultimately it doesn't work in law. Well, I'm sorry, Your Honour, he said I should do that, so I did. You will still be prosecuted over that. We can't even consent to violence against us if you have a small bruise or a mark or a love bite. Technically illegal. We have to take responsibility for those things. Am I responsible for your well-being? To a certain extent, I'm responsible for not making things worse or adding to those things, but I can't fix you. I can't make you better. We can't take it out on somebody else. We can't infantilize the person that we're with, even if they're a little. We have to think about, okay, I'm still working with an adult here. And if the person isn't capable of making those decisions, then we have to think, is this the sort of relationship that I want? There's a lot of messages. Should we go through them? Tom says, today lots of meaning and general communication is lost in text. I agree. So I always ask for clarification. I really notice when I'm talking, hey, you didn't answer that question. Can I just check with you? I find it interesting when people skip questions. That's interesting. Hey, so what did you think about this? Just ignored. That keeps happening. Why? Be curious. Andy says, I don't know if this is slightly off piece, but I've been on the scene for a bit. If I got talking with a girl, say in a pub, if things were progressing, then I feel it's my responsibility to let them know I'm kinky. If they then said that's not for me, then I accept that, or they may say, tell me some more. But I feel it boils down to me not being open and strong enough in the earlier years of my marriage, which ultimately ended in one of the things that was kinky and one wasn't. So I feel a responsibility to be open and honest for both parties' sake. It may or may not ever happen, but having now discovered more about myself, I feel I owe a person my honesty as to who I am. And you know what? I think you owe yourself that honesty. If you're going to have a conversation with somebody and you're going to have nothing but vanilla sex and it's not what you want for the rest of your life, you've just fucked yourself over. It's like lying about an orgasm. I've got a writing again. I've always got a writing, haven't I? I'm so boring. Sorry. I've got a writing on fucking hell. Can we stop lying about orgasms, please? Because we tell that other person that how many years? What if you end up with them for 20 years and you're still faking it? It's not a good scenario. We need to be honest with ourselves, let alone anybody else. And I think it's...
No, really, you owe it to yourself. And that's that position of empowerment. You don't just owe it to the other person, you owe it to you. But also you owe yourself that disclosure at a time that feels all right. Because what you're saying there is ultimately, I feel obliged to make a disclosure. When we choose to disclose, whether it's I'm a kinky pervert or I have lived experience of trauma, it doesn't matter what it is. But you don't owe anybody that disclosure before you're ready to make it. So when do you feel that you owe that to yourself? And it's that balance of empowerment. I think that's a really subtle difference, but it's really important.
In a lot of workshops that I've done, I've said to people, at what point do you think we should state that we are kinky? At what point do you think you should state that you have mental health issues?
Yeah.
Interestingly, the kink is within the first few dates. And interestingly, the mental health issues, the familiarity that I've got in the research, it's not proper research. I've only done, I don't know, I reckon in workshops I think I said the other day, I've done over 2,000 workshops and had well over 120,000 people in workshops over my time. And the average in that is what people will say is within 3 months that you share something about yourself. So it gives people a different decision to allow them to stay with you or not. But it's also about being authentic to yourself in that moment. And that's part of our responsibility, to be authentic to ourselves. Sorry, Jerry.
There's a difference between when you disclose and when you lie.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
It's like I would take my time disclosing. If someone asks me a question, I'm not going to lie from day one.
It's about being active within that, isn't it? It's about action, and again, it's about an empowerment. Weak Pirate says, in that regard of unintentionally or accidentally crossing a boundary, I was talking about clusterfucks earlier, that is also almost an eventuality in longer relationships. 100%. You will fuck up. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And actually, in good relationships, we talk about possibility, we talk about what we'll do, and it's like having a shit. That's what it's like, and I say this a lot. It's like having a good relationship is like having a shit. It's osmosis. It's when the bow, you might go apart, but you come back together, and we get this lovely movement going. So we get this perfect shit out. But we have to talk about this. We have to deal with it. We can't leave it here. We get overflow diarrhea, we get constipation. It won't help us. I can't believe I'm really saying that in a workshop, but I've written about it before. So I think it's really important. And that is when you run away. See, exactly not. Wendy says, I forgot to tell him I suffer from chronic vertigo and he hooked me and spun me around. Oh, yeah. But it's interesting. So Wendy, that's interesting. I like what you just said. I forgot to tell him. You know, you have taken accountability and responsibility and said, that's my bad. I did that in that scenario, in that moment. They're not to blame. They haven't assaulted me. They haven't caused me harm. They didn't know. And I think that's really important, that we need to see it that way rather than go into blame. Cherry says, we ignore where it goes wrong as the human bias. It's counter to many cultures to admit defeat. Absolutely. Or show a weakness. And I find it really sad that we think vulnerability and openness is weakness, whereas actually it's incredibly strong. It's the belief that you can't be weak, which will make you most vulnerable. And yet vulnerability is where relationships happen. That's when really good relationships happen. Jerry, good luck phoning ambulance, because I referenced 999. It took over 2 hours for the police to arrive after a recent 999 call I made. God, I'm really sorry to hear that. I think if you turn around and say, my partner isn't breathing, they will put an emergency on that. There are different levels of criteria as to what they're going to do. CF99, you must be new here. Definitely not new, but I think I don't always say the whisk aware. And trying to think ourselves not taking to A&E, talk about accountability. I mean, it was interesting because I was only wearing a coat and a pair of high heels. The amount I jumped in the shower and washed a lot of the blood out. I did. If anyone's been triggered by blood, sorry about that.
They were definitely talking about you over coffee and biscuits that day, weren't they? You were the story.
Oh God! If there was a story of being in A&E in one of those hospital programs, Deborah walked in with quite a unique situation. I'm definitely going to be one of those. Oh my God, we saw one of those today. We saw the gerbil in the bag. That's what we saw. Or the hoover, or the dead fish. Line says, I accidentally hit a sub I was flogging in the eye. During a session. It was with a rubber flogger. I ended the scene, ran and got water to rinse the eye, kept talking to her. Her significant other was also present. And after we calmed the eye, made sure she was okay and that she should contact a doctor later if things went worse. Her significant swiped her way to aftercare, leaving me very unsure about the level of hurt I accidentally made. Later, it was so difficult to get in contact to check the status of the eye because the significant other was gatekeeping the unlucky sub. I felt like the worst person. I really understand that. Really understand that. And I think it's really difficult. I've had situations where things have definitely gone wrong, and we have an accountability and a responsibility in that. And actually, I think it can be very kind and generous of the other person to realise that, hey, I feel really bad about causing you pain or harm. Rather than being blamed for that, we need a discussion. And I think things do go wrong. Michelle, what kind of BDSM were you doing that causes pain like that?
Normal BDSM for you.
Yeah, being fucked from behind, doggy style, quite violently, and quite gently punched, and sometimes harder in the hips and in my arse. You have bursa everywhere. You'd be shocked at how many bursa you've got where you sit down and your arse goes on the side. Bursa are tiny, tiny pockets, and they can split and break for lots and lots of reasons. It's not just BDSM that causes problems with them. I just didn't know at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 that my bursa could split and it might cause me some problems. And we can blame lots of reasons and different things. It doesn't quite work that way. And I sincerely hope that in 10, 15 years that I'm not going around saying I know everything there is to know about the scene. But I tell you what, I think you'll know an awful lot about the scene, because what happens in the scene is that it's cyclical. You watch these cycles happen all the time over things. Something slightly new comes into it, like Daddy. Gosh, when I were a lass, when I lived in Shoebox in Middle Road when I were little, Daddy wasn't around. If you called someone Daddy, you're a fucking pervert and a paedophile. Like, you shouldn't do that. Now Daddy is everything, everywhere. And actually culturally, again, got a writing on this. What a surprise.
Where's Minoria?
Yeah. Oh, when you need him. It's because he used to put a lot of links up to my writings every time I mention them. So we have to be aware of that, don't we? That there's history to this. There are lots of different reasons to call people different things, and they come into style or trend or fashion depending on what's going on. I think poly is pretty trendy at the moment. It's really come up. There are arguments, are we born this way, are we made this way? Have the debate all you like, it's both. It's always going to be the answer, it's a little bit of everything. And we just have to have an awareness, don't we, of, right, things are cyclical, here we go again. Oh, this happened last time. And it can make us want to leave. I definitely left the scene for quite a while at one stage, and I came back into it about 10 years ago and offered to do workshops about 7 years ago. We now have WACK, apparently. WACK.
Whisk aware, consensual kink, something.
I thought, fuck, I've missed out on something there. That's funny, Lee. That's funny. I like that. BDSM dating figure Cosmic, definitely not, as much as I love him. We argue about quite a lot of things. Risk awareness is key. You can give consent, but you should also demand respect. Do you know what? That's an interesting one. I don't think I should demand respect. I think I'm owed respect. I think it's a basic common thing that we can give each other. I had this, I got 2 crocheted cushions dropped off to me today, cushion covers, by this lovely lady who does a lot of crocheting for me. They're kind of grey and orange squares, and they're in my dining room. I really like the cushion covers. She couldn't drop them off yesterday because her daughter fell in Brighton and she split her head quite badly, enough that she needed stitches in hospital. And she phoned her mum, semi-delirious, not quite okay. Not one person stopped to see if she was okay. Not one person asked if she needed anything. Why? That's so interesting. I don't think we give basic respect to anyone all the time anymore.
But I think that's back to empowerment. I would never use the term demand respect. I don't think I demand respect. However, I do think it's within my gift to be respected. So it's about that earning of respect. It's about that, what can I do to promote that, like I said, be authentic, to be respectable. And that will depend, to be respectable on the scene is very different to be respectable in my day job. What does that look like? But I don't think that that's outside of my sphere of influence. I think I can do things about that, but I wouldn't say that I demand it either.
No, I'd agree with that. I think basic respect is a beautiful thing to give every human being. I think it's a nice thing to do. However, I don't think we'll all do it. Control freak, but doesn't lying about orgasms come with age and maturity? No, is the answer to that one. Because what you'll find statistically is, especially women in their, as in cis-born women, especially if they're still women later, in their 40s and 50s, statistically still today, a lot of women haven't orgasmed, haven't ever tried to properly maybe, or don't know how to. So actually it's quite interesting. Yeah, I would say no. I would love to say yes. I think a lot of younger people feel really empowered. You fucking owe me, give me an orgasm. I think that's wonderful that we, no, I want an orgasm. My orgasm matters to me. And I don't think we should just be chasing orgasms either. It's the same with PIV, penis and vagina sex. It's not the only form of sex we can have. There are many alternatives. There are much better ways. In this piece that I'm writing, when I talk about how long it takes, so when we talk about arousal factors and arousal times around sex, when the vaginal cavity starts to open up and elongate and change to create space for anything to be put inside it, from a finger to a penis to a fist to a whatever you fancy, a whisk, whatever can go inside it. Do you know the average vagina takes 30 minutes to complete that section? 30 minutes of turn on is needed to make that fully there. And yet how many of us are just banged into pretty quickly? That's quite an interesting statistic, I thought. Andy says, and as we get older, I think your time is shorter and you need to make it count. Yeah, but I think, I remember when I had cancer, I spoke to somebody else on the scene who had cancer when she was 20. And she was neutropenic 10 times in her treatment. She had leukemia, she was really unwell. And actually after she wanted to make her life count even from 22. I think it's relative to experiences of in our own lives. Bristol Top says, once you say you are kinky, it's interesting to sit back and see what questions they ask. It tells you a lot about the other person. And I think it's really okay if someone says, that's not for me. I have total respect for what anyone says. I think they have misconceptions sometimes, like the 50 Shades of Grey. A lot of people like that, a lot of people don't. There's a real variety as to what we will listen to and what we want to hear, and it's okay. It's okay. That's okay. I totally respect your... I was talking to my youngest about this because she is kinky. My eldest and my youngest are kinky. And, I said to her the other day, Erin, I'm getting rid of some of this stuff. Do you want any of it? Yeah, I'll have that, she said. And I think Jerry's having something, and I think Poppy's having something, because I've got this little bag of stuff that I'm giving away. And Erin overshared a few, last year, with her flatmate about all the things that she was doing and showing her some bruises and stuff. Actually, that's bad on Erin. There's a responsibility there to understand that some people don't want to hear this stuff. It makes them feel really uncomfortable. And I think that needs respect too. I shouldn't shove my shit down your throat. I think we have to be really aware of that as well. John says, informed consent requires being informed. So I'd argue some disclosures are required. I'd agree with you. And I think sometimes we don't always understand that we can't know everything. And we can't know how we're going to react. We can't know what we're going to do. And there are some things that are really obvious. I remember an advert being put on FetLife a long time ago, where a male dominant said, hey, my sub doesn't know I'm writing this, but I would like to find 3 or 4 other men, and I would like to bind her to the bed, gag her, earplug and blindfold, and I'd like you to take turns, and I'd like to see if she notices a difference to see who it is. Consent, accountability, quite interesting. Did she agree to that? I remember being tied to a bed many years ago, and my one thing that we were about to do with a couple of people, I said, I don't want any of their partners in if they've got partners, unless I'm really made aware that partners are coming. And I heard this woman giggle, and I stopped the scene completely. And actually, she didn't have my consent to be in the room. And what was interesting is she, you know, he said, well, what did you want me to do? There was no one else for her to be with. She's not fucking 12. She doesn't need a babysitter. She was a full-ass grown woman of 40. That was a real insecurity in that relationship. And it was like, no, I don't want it. And look, you have to think about, what is it that I want? Lee, I don't know what that picture is. I don't know if someone else can link to it. I don't know what it is. Sorry. I've only been in the lifestyle for 1.5 years, and I started with educating myself first and working with a BDSM coach. I'm really interested in what qualifies a BDSM coach.
Who's the BDSM coach?
Like what qualifies us? Why are we right? Why am I right? If you come and see me as a therapist, I can show you an awful lot of qualifications, but I can't show you any in kink because they don't exist. That's just experience. Who's to say that experience is right or wrong, and what do we do? That's complex. This is who I am, and BDSM will always be a huge part of me. I think it's really brilliant that you took responsibility. I love that. Taking things slow and safe, 100% agree with you. I've also been really lucky to have found an amazing group of experienced kinksters who teach me with honesty and integrity, and I really like that. I think the frenzy to have a partner, says Mistress Rose, drives people to search in places that do not match their complete interests. I would also argue, and I've said this many, many, many times, is that a hungry heart will eat an awful lot of lies. We would rather be lied to and have something rather than nothing. We often feel that we get something out of, and actually it's not what we truly want. We have to be very careful about that. So therefore we do take more risks. Replying to, I think, the frenzy, if you're seeking a partner, it's not so easy for a guy. I think gender is irrelevant if you're looking for a partner, and I really do say this. I think gender can come into it. I think age can come into it. I think size can come into it. I think experience can come into it. I think a lot of things can come into it. I think if you're looking for sex, it's pretty easy. It's probably easier if you've got a vagina, statistically. I once did my own little survey, because I actually did this. I wonder how long it would take to put a random advert up and see how quickly someone would be inside my cunt. The answer is 20 minutes, because I found that out. Yeah, under 20 minutes, like it's not hard. But that person isn't in a relationship. It's not a partner. It's sex, it's play sometimes. Debs, you've sown a seed in my head. Elmer Fudd saying whisk. Thanks for that. You're welcome. I like to give. Mistress Rose says, I think the pandemic has created a false need to not be alone. I would agree with that. Yeah. People are really searching. We have skin hunger, we have intimacy hunger, we have physicality hunger, we have sex hunger, we have play hunger. We really, really want. Zoe, can childbirth and the pelvis changing during childbirth cause the same issue with your hip steps? Different hip issues when we're talking about pelvis, and we're talking about looseness, and we're talking about different chemicals in your body causing different issues. Not with a bursa on the outside, that's more outside in and damage, whereas actually childbirth can cause all sorts of problems with the pelvis and the hips by inside and the stretching and the relaxing in our system and different things that happen. Are you okay? Your face is getting really red. You know that thing about personal things? You know, yeah, I'm hot, I'm not well. My friend works in A&E. Someone came in with a Barbie doll stuck up their arse. Was the Barbie wearing a condom? I love that. I want to know if the hands were up, or was the hair in, or
no, the doll's arms were stuck, so the hands weren't up. That was the problem.
Oh, the doll's arms were stuck. I think one of the worst stories I've ever heard, excuse me, and it's why I mentioned it earlier, was somebody who put a frozen fish inside themselves, and as they were putting it in, it started to defrost. And of course, fish have certain bones in certain ways, and as they pulled, the bones got stuck. Well,
I think that kind of outwhisks you, actually.
It outwhisks me, it does. Daddy still makes me feel uncomfortable. I understand that, that's okay. I loved your writing on daddies, thank you. Replying to Mr. I very much agree, and not everyone is as comfortable being alone. The pandemic caused a lot of damage, more than just an illness. It really, really did. Condolfric, I'm entitled to respect. You might be, but you might not get it. We can demand entitlement and we still might not get it. And in fact, if we demand, we definitely won't get it for a lot of people. So I think we need to find the small basics about that. Brighton used to be more friendly and helpful than that. Did it? There's a really famous case of a young girl who was taken along Churchill Square for people who don't know, Brighton has these really, really wide pavements. And so this group of men had driven along and they grabbed this young woman who was by a window and nobody did a thing. So that bystander apathy, which Cindy is talking about, is absolutely horrific. It's too dangerous to approach people these days, even to help, even to off. What, you're going to off them. I like that. They're not cushion covers, they're bra cups. Not sure about that comment. Bit too personal, not okay. I'm going to delete that, and if I see another one, I might take you out of the room. Better late than never. Welcome, Titsub. Andy, you know, for me, and I don't know if this is healthy, but I've always prioritised a woman enjoying an orgasm rather than me, but I don't know if then that she has had implications of me being able to let go of a sexual experience. It might be. For me with that, what I might be saying, first of all, is does she want the orgasm? Does it matter to her? What matters to her? That's the point, isn't it? It's accountability and responsibility.
Depends if the woman wants the orgasm, doesn't it, ultimately, you know?
Exactly that. That does not sound good at all. I'm trying to catch up. So Barbie has shoulder dystonia.
Yes, Barbie does.
John, I think men and women have very different experiences seeking no-string sex. I think people do. I think we forget non-binary a lot within that and how people identify. I would argue that somebody who's non-binary has a lot more trouble finding sex. Somebody who's transitioning can have a lot more trouble finding sex. I think it's very, very difficult. Believing it's easy is a female privilege. Yeah. The scales are like a one-way thing. Coming out would rub you up the wrong way for sure. I worked one online with Sarah Butcher, sub in the city. She's a BDSM coach, kink educator. Cool. I've never heard of her. It was the best thing I could have done for myself. I'm so glad. That's good. Apologies. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll never look at Barbie the same way again. It just makes me want to go and see the big Barbie film. Like if the new one that's coming out, that's what it makes me want to do. Damn, she can get inside me. That's all I'm saying, because she is hot.
I've got a lovely Barbie from Kinky Kraken, who do lots of age play toys. I love them. And it's in bondage, it's a rope bondage, and she's all tied up. And I think that was where they went wrong in this situation. Barbie did not have rope bondage attached.
So what about consent during a scene? During a scene, says Shadow, sorry. What about consent during a scene if you fall physically unconscious but are mentally unconscious, but can't communicate, you still want to keep going? Then actually the other person should stop unless you have prior approval of exactly what you're doing. And for me, at that stage, I might even start filming and then let them delete it straight away afterwards, even though that's without consent, to show what I did was okay. I think if somebody falls unconscious, their consent stops with their unconsciousness, unless you've agreed that that's hot and that's something that you want to do. But then you've also agreed exactly what when. I had a friend many years ago who she would get into such an interesting subspace in her head that she would just disappear. And I would watch her fairly often because I was always pretty concerned about her. And I was watching one guy who started doing stuff to her that was not what she would agree. And I went over and I said, you need to stop what you're doing. Who the fuck are you? And she's not with it. And look, do I have a right to go and stop somebody's scene? No, this was at a private party. Would I do it again? 100% tomorrow, without a doubt. If I saw somebody I cared for not in that state. So I think you have to be aware that what is it that I've agreed to and what are the implications of this.
And I think it's a really popular fantasy, that, Shadow, but looking at it from with the medical head on, there are only a very few substances that would render somebody physically incapable of doing anything but mentally present to be able to consent, and they're certainly not things that are easily obtainable in the UK. So I think that's interesting. I think you're more likely to encounter something like that when you've got something like, say, medical issues or disassociation, which is what Debs has said there. And for me, you're saying that they have the capacity to consent, but like I said earlier on, only one circumstance has to change, and then that renders that consent null and void for me. So are you really able to offer consent to that situation? I would always err on the safe side of caution there, unless it was a very meticulously and methodically planned scene that we talked about for a long time.
Now, I think if you do have a medical issue where you do pass out and you explain that to somebody, let's say narcolepsy or something, and please carry on, but I'm semi-aware, or dissociative disorder, or functional neurological disorder, or it might be that somebody, has what we used to call multiple personality disorder. I'm just trying to use old names so everybody can understand what I'm saying, because everything changes all the time. So what is it here? Poppy and I were talking about a workshop a long time ago. Poppy was in, I think, with Simon, and somebody was saying, oh, I love it when somebody changes personality because I'm then playing with somebody else. Yeah, and that person hasn't given you consent, mate. Like, fucking, are you serious? It's really interesting what people say. It's not even interesting, it's just fucking illegal. And I think what you've got there as well, Shadow, what you have to think about is you've got a legal issue that then changes everything. Because if somebody is unconscious but aware, actually they can't give consent. So in any court of law, you're going to be found guilty there. So you've got a moral dilemma versus a legal dilemma there. And that's where we have to think about, what are the implications of this? What happens? I've got to be really careful here.
And I think sometimes it's really helpful to look at these situations and apply them to a different context. So for me, if we're talking about BDSM and whether something's, how should we view our accountability, essentially, to bring it back to the workshop, how should we view our accountability and our responsibilities towards somebody when it comes to BDSM? I think it's really helpful to transfer that to a different environment. So for me, the obvious one there, someone who's got some medical condition that means that this occurs. If I was to transfer that to a medical setting, there would be a care plan attached to that. That is reality. That would be care planned. So what's our version of that? We've had a conversation about this. This is our agreement to one another. It's written down, it's understood, it's shared, and it's reviewed, documented, evaluated, all that kind of stuff. And that would go some of the way of looking at this issue. And if I was playing with somebody who had epilepsy or something like that, that's what personally how I would deal with that situation.
I'm also going to argue, even if you are the unconscious person, it's a side effect that's caused a lot of stress for my mental health, I'm sure. I'm really sure it has, and it must be awful to live through and to live with. I'm also going to argue that physiologically our body changes when we are unconscious, because the way we relax and the different things that happen, like Zoe's just mentioned needles or something. No, you didn't. Why did I? Safe play. So I'm going to say needles. For example, if your body is relaxed and changes your blood flow, it changes your skin, it changes everything about you physiologically in that moment. And that's maybe something I would want a really experienced partner to be okay with, and to know that, you know, your bruise will be different. Everything that's about to happen could be completely different. Even sexual responses are completely different. And you can actually make a dead body have an erection or an orgasm if you touch all the right spots. There are certain things that you can do in the spine and inside. So we have to be really careful physiologically also about the responses that somebody's going to have. So we have to be really careful about that as well. There is a medical responsibility.
It sounds really, really difficult, doesn't it? And in light of that new information, I think what I would put to you is I would look at the idea of the BDSM Advanced Directive. Essentially, that's what I would do, and I would sit down and we'll plan it out like that. This is something that you're experiencing, and almost view it in that way.
So that, to me, that advanced directive is a little bit of a plan, a little bit pre-mortem. What could go wrong? What do I do if? And what is each person's culpability and responsibility? Pam said, once I'm in subspace, I cannot really consent. I always play with tops that are quick to pause or stop if something weird occurs. And that's interesting, isn't it? What's weird? According to whom? Who's accountable for weird? We talk about subspace, but we don't talk about dom space. We talk about sub drop, but we don't talk about dom drop. We don't talk enough about that everybody gets something from these things, and that we can all get into the wrong headspace in the wrong way at any one time. And again, whose responsibility is that? These people aren't kink dispensers. They're not kink providers. They're not sex providers. They're not sex dispensers. They're not dispensers or providers of anything, be that emotional, physical. It's really complex to say who decides that. And actually, sometimes you do have to think morally in a court of law, what would happen here? As a therapist, the question I ask myself is, how would I answer this in a coroner's court? And that's quite an interesting question to ask yourself. How would I explain this away to a family? How would I explain, what would I be saying here? And it's quite chilling to have to do that. Zoe says, as someone who has blackouts, play should stop. For people who physically stop responding unless discussed, then stop also. And actually, somebody might want it to carry on. But again, it's the awareness, isn't it? Because is unconsciousness, does it get worse? How long are you unconscious for? What does it look like? What control do you have? What are you aware of? Are you disassociating? Are you present? Is it what causes those things? What are you doing to look after yourself within them? And what's the impact of that afterwards? I think it's a lot of things to think about. Andy says, surely if a scene was going to involve someone being unconscious, then a third responsible party who's on the agreement has to be present. I don't think they do. I think it's about respect, it's about agreement, and it's about trust. They don't necessarily have to have a third party or a film or anything. I mean, there is a subreddit group of men. You could say borderline incel, you could say absolutely not, you could say the opposite, where they will put secret cameras in their bedrooms nowadays, not because actually filming illegally might take less of a problem than a rape accusation. So they film, they don't use it for masturbation, they don't use it for anything, they just keep it in case somebody turns around and says that didn't go the way I wanted it. So that the person can say, actually, I've got photographic or video evidence. But I think you have to be careful, Cheryl. I don't know if you actually heard any of that. One of the most important things I'm saying to you is physiologically, your body is different when it is unconscious to conscious. And you have to be really aware that your blood flow could be different, bruising, marking, your breathing changes when we're unconscious. You really have to be aware. The other person has to be aware of it. If I do these things to you, if I cut you, blood flow could be really different. You then come back and there's more blood flow. And all of a sudden we've got a gushing, we've got a bleed and it's quite serious or something along those lines.
If you did miss that, Shadow, it recorded, so you can listen back to what we said and what our answers were, because there was some discussion over it. But I think it's really interesting, Andy, what you were saying. It leads back into what we were talking about responsibility. And it's really interesting because you said the third responsible party. Responsible for what? Responsible for who? What are the obligations? The only time I ever brought a third party into a scene, as far as I can remember, I might be wrong, was in relation to a very long captivity scene. And it's one of the biggest fuck-ups that I ever made in a scene, because I put what I would presume would be the obvious long time ago on somebody else, and it wasn't obvious, and it ended up in a scene that was a clusterfuck. So it's, you know, what do we mean by, and you talked about that before as well, have you bring another person in, and it's almost like that understanding of, you know, back to couples work, this is my understanding. The more people you have, the more work you have to do to make sure you have a shared understanding of what responsibility is.
So with 3 people, there is more than one relationship. There is one relationship between these 2, there is one relationship between these 2, and there's one relationship between these 2, and there is a relationship between all of them, and there are perceptions of the relationships of others, so it's a lot more complex.
Reset to that expectation.
There is a fine line between unconscious and deep subspace, in my humble opinion. But look, some people don't even hit subspace, and some people disagree that subspace even exists. It's often a state of euphoria, it's often a state, so it's quite different to unconsciousness. I don't know if it's a fine line. I think they're pretty different for different reasons. I think unconsciousness can often mean no memory. It can often mean not aware, unaware, but actually subspace can be aware for some people. That's the point. I think whereas subspace can also be unaware for other people. It depends what they're doing. Andy says, Dom space could take you on a path where you become not fully responsible for your actions. Totally agree, because you are then on a high equal to subspace, and equally the drop can be the same. Totally. Cherry says, Cherry Jam, in a situation where someone's been told to help themselves to sex from a person asleep and no CNC agreement or negotiation of anything sober between these 2, and apologises after for the misread that they've been told you'd be into it, how do you untangle that? You don't do what someone else tells you. That's what you do there. If you have 2 people and one says you can do that to them, my answer is, I'll find that out for myself. Thanks. And if I can't find that out for myself, I ain't doing what's about to happen. I had a situation, it's an example I've given many years ago, where the person I was with, we consensually kidnapped someone, tied them to an oak bed that we bought at Sexhibition or one of those type things at the time. Fucking solid oak bed this was. And this person broke this bed trying to kill me. Why? I slapped her around the face. Why did I slap her around the face? Because it was part of the scene. She lost it. I used to switch a lot more than I do now. She lost it. And I'm looking at this list saying, I don't understand, because this list says it doesn't say face slapping. So I phoned the person who set this up, her dominant male, who didn't want to be there. She didn't want him there. And I say, fuck, help. And he went, oh, fucking hell, I'm so sorry. I meant to put that on the list. She hates it. Never again. That taught me something, that unless I've had the conversation with the person, I'm not interested in having second or third hand conversations. So for me,
what I will say in that scenario, intent really matters. So I didn't mean quick, okay, but intent really matters. And I think, you know, for me, how I would untangle that is, the person who ultimately, you know, somebody invited themselves to sex without that conversation happening, I think they're well within their rights to feel that they've been raped. I really do. However, I think it's understandable for a person in that scenario to not feel that that was their intention and their intent. If their intent was to have a scene which they genuinely thought the other person would enjoy, but my God, it's a clusterfuck and a half, isn't it? Legally, I don't even want to get involved in the legal ramifications of that because they're really significant. But,
and,
you know,
morally, it could ruin your reputation. It could ruin everything if somebody says, yeah, that's what happened and that's what they did. And you're saying, no, but it was okay because their partner said. And I had a situation recently where a couple told me about something that happened. Missed out a tiny bit of information and it sounded a bit more dodgy. But then when that other bit of information came in, it sounded less dodgy. But it was still a problem because actually it was a problem of communication between the couple. And that's, it just gets so messy. And we've just got to be careful of how do I untangle this before I even create a tangle. How do I avoid a tangle? That's my question all the time. It's that risk awareness. How do I avoid a tangle? John said, I had a partner who got very spacey and non-verbal. However, they enthusiastically, well, not spacey, wanted to continue play. We did, as you talked about, we discussed, thought about the risks, agreed what was okay. They also understood and respected that my decision to stop was final. We have to respect the fucking top. Why do we think often as submissives, yeah, I want you to carry on, so you should? No, they've got a say in it too. I can't remember, was it Cosmic or somebody was talking quite a while ago about, or was it on FetLife? I can't remember. You know, get things confused, don't you, when you hear stories where somebody was in a club or something and somebody turned around and said, I didn't fucking tell you to stop, carry on.
Kink dispenser, entitlement, it's awful, isn't it?
So I think we have to respect each other's decisions as final. They accepted that I would only go as far as I was comfortable. Tops get to set limits and call stop too. 100%. Sweet pirates. But I also feel it's a responsibility of play partners to only play if they feel comfortable and safe when you enter a dom subspace. Agreed. It's this whole thing, isn't it? So what does that space look like? What do I need to look for? What do I need to understand? How far do I go afterwards? Because if that person is in that dreamy space and state, physiologically, they change. We know through anxiety and stress forever, like if we look at things like this thing that I'm writing at the moment, if we look at things like dyspareunia or vaginismus, so dyspareunia is pain, vaginismus is tightening. When we're more anxious, our vagina is more likely to tighten up and everything's going to change. And if we then relax completely, it means everything changes, accessibility, everything. So we have to be aware of the difference in our partner's anatomy and physiology when everything relaxes. Now, anatomy doesn't change a lot. Your heart doesn't jump to a different place and your lungs aren't in a different place. However, when we relax, our fat disperses slightly differently. Our skin, there's a lot of things that come into that and you need to be aware. Shadow, I love that you brought up a third person because I had someone other than my dom off to play with me. My dom, I trust 1,000,000%, but I do want to lower the third person's worries, which will take a lot of conversation. Andy says, I suppose if the third party was known to each party, how do they prioritise their responsibility? I imagine it can then become sterile, as if the third party is just an independent adjudicator. Yeah. What's my role here? What is it I'm supposed to do? What does this look like? And I think we have to think about safety. I think we have to think about being sober. I think we have to, that's ironic, you wrote that at the same time. If you get drunk, then you are responsible for your actions drunk. If you play, then you have to take responsibility for your action in top or in subspace. 100%. That's what it's about. So I need to play sober. I need to check in. I need to, as a therapist, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Deb, I want you to work on this with me, it is my responsibility to say, I have the experience of that or I don't. And you need to go and see that friend, or you need to go and see this person, or you need to go and see somebody else. That's my professional responsibility. I shouldn't see somebody whose situation I've never dealt with before in my life. But there again, you also have to get experience. So it's interesting, how do you achieve and attain that? So we have to be careful. We have to be responsible for what we're eating, what we're drinking. If you're about to play, is your hydration good? Do you have enough protein in your system? Have you got enough calories in your system? The other day at Showcase for Cheer, one of our groups really started to collapse. And I said, you are the most unfit group in here. You have a responsibility to eat and drink well before you come back later. Especially as I know one of them has disordered eating and she's a friend as well, so it's slightly different. And I pulled her aside and I went, go and fucking eat something. She went, I know, I'm going to. But we have a long established relationship. It's not therapeutic. It's not professional. And, you know, she's been in institutions for 3 years and she is getting a lot better, a hell of a lot better. She has to be responsible. You have to eat before you do these things. You have to be aware of all these things that could influence you. How is your mental health today? How is your stress today? How are you physically? What are you stressed out about? What's the implication of us playing right now? What's the implication of us having this conversation? I'm responsible for that. You should do this. You need to do that for me. I need this from you. Actually, no one else can truly make us happy. Only we can. Only we can be responsible for our safety, our wellness, our mental health, and everything else as well. Other people may help. The things they do may be therapeutic, but it doesn't make them therapy. There's a difference between those two things. And I think the same about when it comes to accountability and responsibility. We have to look at understanding what safe words are. We have to understand that if we tie someone up, we shouldn't leave them. We have to understand that if we gag someone, we shouldn't leave them. We have to understand that if we try and choke someone out, we need to check what medication they're on, how old they are, what problems they have. We have to understand what we're about to do and take responsibility for it. We never think it's going to go wrong. We always think it's going to be okay. Yet people die from doing what we do. And no, they don't. Yeah, they do. They do. And you are responsible. So true. You must be happy with yourself. I'm even going to take happy and bring that down a notch to content. Okay. I think happy is something we all try and achieve, but actually I think happy is a high. I think if we take a DNA helix and turn it on its side, I think okayness is in the middle. And I think at some times it's okay to be really high and happy, but most of the time we just need to be okay. And some of the time we'll be down, but we just need to understand that that's always in motion, that we have this opportunity to make ourselves okay, but that's a really big deal to ask someone to even be aware.
And that's resilience, isn't it? That's what it boils down to, that resilience. For me, often it's not that I'm happy, but you know what, I'm all right with the consequences, I can deal with it. And it's back to that normalisation of mistakes. So we can say to the blue in the face, you know, we need to be aware of what might happen. But then the other side of this in terms of accountability is, well, okay, it went wrong, you fucked up, what happened? Not even, you know, big stuff. I mean, one for me, I'm waiting for a hysterectomy. I'm not having a lot of unprotected sex at the moment because I know I could be called in for enough at any moment. I don't want kids. I got carried away. I got carried away recently. Well, what does that look like? What does that look like for me? Am I going to take the morning after pill? Am I not? Am I going to do this? Well, what would the consequence be if that happened? And how would I handle that? And will I, you know, probably buy a pregnancy test on day 12 just to rule it out? All of those silly little things that you do, but I'm okay with that. I accept the consequences of the decisions that I made, and this is what I'm going to do about them. And that should be every time, after every scene that we do that. And anybody who says that doesn't happen repeatedly as part of this process, like you said earlier on, Dex, they're either lying or they're not playing. They're not having sex, they're not having relationships, they're not taking risks. Because that's just part of living life.
Yeah, and something will go wrong. And I think what it's a really good idea to have an idea of what could go wrong. It's that awareness. What will you do? What would this look like? Do I know basic first aid? Do I know basic anatomy? When I run a class on consent, I get really upset sometimes, and I don't have the right to get upset. Who the fuck am I? I really understand that. And I still get upset that why wouldn't you go to a consent class or an anatomy class before you go to a flogging class? Yes, you know how to flog, but where's the fucking anatomy? What's going to matter here about where I'm flogging? Do I know how to resus? Do I know how to care for somebody if I do something wrong? If I get it in someone's eye, things go wrong, wrap around.
But flogging's more fun.
Yeah, exactly. And who wants fun without responsibility? Oh no. Wait.
Do we have, you know, somebody even in this group earlier on today spoke about the fact they had a really positive experience with a BDSM coach. That's great, it's fabulous, I'm all for that. But ultimately, if we don't necessarily know what all our options are, if we can't, you know, come up with a huge big pro and con list and possible, you know, outcome or resolve to a situation, because we're in the middle of it, we're in the thick of it, we're emotional, we're upset, we're not thinking straight, we had a clusterfuck, something happened. Who are we going to? What was our support network? What happens at the end of the scene? Is it the person that we shared space with? Wonderful. It might need to be somebody else. It might need to be somebody who's got a different degree of insight, or who has some, you know, for me, quite often, if I've had experience something, I want to go to another female and talk about that. Or I want to go to somebody who will hold me to account and who will say the shit that other people might not say. That's really important to me. So it's my responsibility to cultivate those relationships around me, and I do, and I have. So, you know, who are your problem solvers? Who are your cheerleaders? We're talking about, you know, one of the biggest impacts in terms of mental health is to have a cheerleader. What does that look like? Who is your cheerleader? Who do you go to? And it might be a coach, it might be somebody else.
Yeah, and friendship as well. Mistress Rose says, I have a play partner who suffers chronic pain, and I have body charts that have to be filled out to include pain level. These will let me know if we can do a heavy impact scene or a more therapeutic one. Completely. And a lot of people use BDSM pain to deal with chronic pain. So pain helps sort pain, ironically, and actually there is a real truth in that. A lot of people do see that. Control Freak says, sorry, I need to drop off and grab food. That's okay, it's opposed to nibbles, but a great evening and thought-provoking. Thank you. Andy says, I always try to make sure that if play is taking place, both parties are fed enough, hydrated, and don't need the loo, especially if going to be in bondage, etc. for a while. Also, if you drool heavily from a gag, ultimately you are getting rid of fluid in your body. And if you aren't hydrated enough, that can be a problem. Absolutely. In so many ways. My mentees get Anatomy 101, First Aid and CPR resources. Yeah, I think they're really important. And I hope that people do those things. But I think also being aware that even if I was going to say as well, we might have the qualifications, but I don't know, it's very different when you watch an accident happen and you are the one called upon to do some CPR when you then panic or you freeze. You have to get used to doing these things. You have to, I think they're things you have to do a couple of times. They're things you have to get used to. They're things you have to have awareness around. You know, how do I sort a cut? What pressure do I put? What do I have to do if restarts? What do I do if there's an emergency? Do I want to play? You know, there's been many a time where, for example, somebody's done needle play and they go way too deep and they go to take the needle out. Don't take the needle out. If you take the needle out, you're about to cause more problems than good. What do you know about sterilization? What would it look like? What is hard? What's good? Is there, like, oh, it's so complex. And it's often things you don't think about. And that's why I think it's really good to have a few scenarios in your head of what would be a crazy situation here. I've said this before. Ranger Gray once shared a story where she was in the middle of a forest being tied to a tree, and her dom had diabetes, the person tying her had diabetes and hadn't been responsible for themselves and made sure their blood sugar levels were okay. And as they dropped, literally dropped to the floor, not dropped as in sub or anything else as well, the rope pulled, and I think she says like it dislocated or impacted her jaw, and there is no one around. There's nothing to do. What do we do this? Tom, I'm new to this scene. This is very interesting. Oh, thank you very much. Things I didn't consider. And that's our job. That's the job of experience. That's the job of this is our profession. It all helps, doesn't it? The crazy things that we don't think of and the different things that we all do, because that's what experience does give us. As a therapist, I thought I'd seen everything. And I have. I've got well over 50,000 hours of experience. I stopped counting a long time ago. Really, more than that. It's probably a hell of a lot more than that. And I thought I'd seen everything. And then I had a young woman walk through my door and said, hi, I want conversion therapy. And I said, sorry? She said, I want conversion therapy. I'm a staunch Christian. It's absolutely ridiculous that I'm gay. I cannot be a lesbian. I need you to convert me. Fuck me, that was a first. I haven't had many in years. That was a real first. Like, there's always going to be a first in some way, shape or form. And then what we have to realize is that there might only be one condition or one situation in the world, but it has many, many, many aspects to it. And we need to understand the person that we're dealing with. So it matters. Oh, woo, it's me. Oh, dear. Right. Has anyone got Oh, my food shop's coming in a minute. Fuck that. Anyone got a question just before we disappear? Thank you. Just before we disappear, anyone got anything about accountability or responsibility that you want to share or say before we disappear? Gesundheit. Merci in French. Gracias. Danke. Oh dear, so I'm really glad. Yeah, come then. Oh, that's really nice, Andy. Thank you. And Poppy, like Poppy doesn't now, so like we have got a wealth of experience between us, but it doesn't make us right. I want to be accountable for things I say that could also be wrong. I want to be accountable for, I don't know if I said that right, and I really want to reflect. It's so fucking important. Going back to clarity and comprehension, what if somebody's judgment and ability to consent is clouded by feelings or rose-tinted glasses and communication issues? I think we need to state that. We need to say that I have a fear. What I love, Brené Brown talks about the story. I like using the words paranoid fantasy. So, if that was happening, I would probably try to say, okay, I have a paranoid fantasy here. I have a theory in my head. And for safety's sake, I want to share it with you. I understand that, you might not agree, and you have the right to do that. And I wouldn't feel an okay human if I didn't share this. My fear right now is this, that if we do this, that you're seeing it that way, and I could be completely wrong, and I really stand open to correction. Boom, just put it out there. I think it's really important. That's why.
And the reality is everybody's judgment is impacted by their feelings. Whether it's clouded, but all of our judgment is ultimately impacted by our feelings, all our emotions, all of the time. We covered that last week, last month, a fortnight ago, if you want to listen to it. But that's the reality of it. And ultimately, all of our judgment and our feelings will be linked to our interpersonal effectiveness or our ability to communicate. So this is not something that's a unique situation. It's about normalising this stuff. It's about normalising that the decisions that I make, the way that I would behave, are impacted by the way that I feel about things. And ultimately, we all have a different skill level when it comes to communication. What now?
I like Rogers talks about the 7 stages of therapy, and stage 7 is this really good personal awareness and ownership. And I think what's interesting is how often we fall into the trap of, I think I know. And I think, we might get conscious competence, but I've added one to conscious. So we've got unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, unconscious competence, and conscious competence. And I think we can get complacent incompetence after that as well. That have been added on, where we think we know and we're good, and we're not. I've done so much training. I have done the equivalent to 20 years worth of training to do what I do. That's how many years I've done. That's crazy, isn't it? That's so much training. And I've had a shit ton of personal therapy, and I fuck up. My emotions get in the way of things. I'm quite quick to come back and to realise. I think that's what the difference is for me, my speed at that self-recognition. It doesn't mean I don't get it wrong.
And for me, it would be in that scenario, it would be, if your consent's clouded by rose-tinted glasses, that indicates to me that you're perhaps consented to things that you might not, because, you feel that.
It's
so
that's hungry heart, isn't it, again? It's that hungry heart. I want this so desperately. I really want this to be good. I want this to be true. And yeah. No,
and as long as you will be okay with that, you'll be okay with the consequences of that if, fine, own it. That's accountability, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Okay, thank you very much. You've all said really lovely thank yous. I really appreciate that. And Pirate says, knowing enough to know how little you know and how much there is to learn. Exactly that. So thank you all very much. Oh, Zoe, you're coming to LAM in March. Lovely. I will see you then. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you all. If you're not on FetLife, please do follow Poppy and/or I. Scene counsellor, she is, and I'm the kink shrink. I also have a coffee and a patron. If you ever want to donate, you don't have to. These things are free. And I will see you all next time. And Poppy will see you all next time. And Jerry will see you all next time. And we really thank you for coming along and for speaking up and speaking out. Thank you. Hope everyone got a little something from today. You are appreciated. You can come up with me, Jerry. Come up in the car. Wank a wave. See you.
I will do.
We should get that.
Because we can say, hey, look what happened in the car. See you later.
We should get that. Bye.
Recording